Okay, it's 12:02, so I want to honor our time for all of our attendees who joined. I'm sure people will be joining throughout. Before we get started, my name is Kathleen Barron. I'm from Austin Parks Foundation. I want to first, before we start anything, ask our outreach manager, Cynthia Rodriguez, to kind of check in with our audience and see if there's anyone who needs Spanish translation services. If folks do opt into it, then just give us a couple minutes to get that all set up in Zoom. Cynthia?
Hola, sí, yo me llamo Cynthia. Antes de empezar, queríamos saber si hay alguien que le gustaría tener servicios de traducción en español. Si le gustaría tener esta opción, si por favor puede como notarlo ahí en la caja chat y le puedo mandar direcciones sobre los siguientes pasos. Gracias.
Okay. All right, looks like we are all set to go. All right, so I just want to say, hold on one second. My view is kind of strange. Okay, can everyone on the panel see everyone? Okay, great. Sorry, I always have to check in. It's hard to always know as the host what everyone else is seeing. So welcome everyone. I'm Kathleen Barron. I'm the Senior Programs Manager at Austin Parks Foundation. I am the coordinator of the Park Summit series. You can find all of our sessions at austinparks.org/parks-summit. We'll also be posting this online afterward if you want to share the webinar. We will be recording this just so everyone knows. The only faces that will be able to be seen are going to be the panelists, but just so everyone knows, this will be recorded throughout. So if you have any questions, those will be recorded through the Q&A part. Just kind of a couple of little housekeeping things before I hand it off to our host at Asakura Robinson. I will be kind of manning the chat/Q&A. So if people have any IT issues, problems hearing, anything like that, I'll be kind of monitoring that. And then I'll also be monitoring the Q&A. So we'll have some times throughout the presentation where people can ask questions just to keep the flow going, make sure that we really have time to address everyone's questions. So if you have something, a burning question, you can always ask it through Q&A, but probably the best thing would be to wait until those times. And before I hand it off to Brianna, I'm going to do a quick poll. First poll I've ever done for a Zoom meeting. So this is exciting. We just want everyone who's attending to tell us a little bit about yourself. So hopefully everyone can see this. If you cannot see it, let me know. We're gonna allow a little bit of time for people to fill out the poll, and then we will let you know the results in a little bit. All right, Brianna, I'm gonna hand it off to you.
Awesome, thank you, Kathleen. So as Kathleen mentioned, I'm Brianna Fry. I'm with Asakura Robinson. I'm gonna be starting the presentation today with a round of introductions so you all can be familiar with our faces. So as I introduce you panelists, please just wave and then we'll move on into the presentation. So Asakura Robinson, we have an office in Austin, Texas, but we're headquartered out of Houston, and we have 2 other offices, one in Minneapolis and one in New Orleans. We are a planning, urban design, and landscape architecture firm, and I am the project manager for the Parks with Purpose project with St. David's Foundation. So Katie Coyne, if you can wave. She is a principal at Asakura Robinson. She's also a certified ecologist, and she's the lead of our urban ecology studio. Next, I have Michelle with us, if you can wave. Michelle Bright, she's a senior designer with us, and she brings implementation experience to our team with her previous experience at Waterloo Greenway Conservancy. So we're really excited to have her on our team. And last from Asakura Robinson is Uja Abba, if you can wave. She is an urban ecology planner and she specializes in our urban resilience work. We also have 2 grantees, Jill, if you can wave, and then Liz, if you can wave. They are going to be introduced later by Katie Coyne, so they will have their own opportunity to speak today. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Great. So thanks to St. David's Foundation and the Austin Parks Foundation for making this webinar happen. Our presentation today will briefly walk you through our work of building a park advocacy toolkit. And in light of the pandemic's impact on park use, and as well as everyone's day-to-day professional lives, we also will be discussing some recent results of a survey that we had sent out in advance of our webinar, as well as some creative ideas that we want to talk through to encourage our community members to participate in active recreation during this weird time that we're all in. We'd love for this webinar to be interactive, so my panelists will be breaking periodically to ask you some questions. So if you feel inclined to participate, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to answer some of our question prompts. Again, as Kathleen mentioned, if you have any questions or concerns, you can also use that feature to get in touch with us. I just also want to remind everyone that this is being recorded and will be available on the Park Summit webpage. So if you have any questions of where that will be, we can link that in our chat at the end of the presentation today. So Kathleen, I want to throw it back to you. If you can close the poll and just let us know what people said.
Sure thing. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. So Brianna, we're not able to see your screen. I don't know if you are sharing.
Oh,
yeah, but it didn't pop up for whatever reason.
thanks.
But while you're doing that, I will. Okay, so the attendees should be able to see the poll results. Okay, and now your screen is showing. Perfect. So what we've got 20% are Parks Department employees, 13% are another civic servant, city or county employee, 40%, so the majority are from a nonprofit organization, 0% from a research institution, and 27% from other.
Awesome. Thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Definitely helps and will guide our conversation. Great. Well, now that you guys can see the agenda I just walked us through, I'm going to go to the next slide, and I'm going to hand it off to Katie Coyne.
Thanks, Brianna. So as Brianna mentioned, my name is Katie Coyne. I'm a principal with Asakura Robinson. Kind of the root of how all this work started was with a project that we're showing the cover of right here called the Healthy Parks Plan for Travis, Bastrop, and Caldwell counties. So this is a regional initiative that St. David's Foundation funded. We worked with the Trust for Public Land and TVG partners on developing this plan that really looked at how parks investments throughout the 3 counties can better impact upstream of health outcomes. So really centered on health, equity, and environmental resilience. I'm actually really excited to announce on this call that as of October 1st, it was announced that we have won a gold award from Texas chapter of American Planning Association for this project. And so this is really the root of a lot of this Parks with Purpose work that St. David's has continued to move forward. That was released in 2018. If anyone's interested, we can certainly post links to that plan and to a mapping tool that came out of that plan that is open access for anyone to use to really understand how environmental, health, socioeconomic data, and parks access is different across that 3-county region. In 2019, St. David's followed up funding that planning project by saying, all right, we're ready to act on it. And so they requested proposals from nonprofits and municipal agencies throughout the 3-county region that built upon the data, the tools, and the resources of that parks plan, and actually granted almost $3 million to 20 different organizations to actually do programs and built projects in parks throughout the region. Then COVID hit, and that's where we're at right now. And St. David's was generous enough to allow grantees to be able to transition funding into operational budgets if that is something folks needed. We know this is a tough time for nonprofits. 40% of those projects are still underway, and we're about to hear from a couple of those grantees right now. So first up, I'm excited to introduce Jill Struby. She's from the city of Smithville and one of the grantees for the Parks with Purpose grant.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Appreciate that. Yeah, we're so excited to be able to get started on this, or to be working on this project. And so we were talking a little bit about the Healthy Parks tool, the plan and the tool that we put together. And you know, I taught statistics for about 8 years at a university, and so seeing all that data kind of come together and bring out the information that we needed to have to be able to build the right kind of park was just really fantastic. So I was grateful to be on the team in Bastrop County when we were working on the parks plan. Really happy to be working with Katie then, and happy to be working with y'all now as well. So it's been a really good experience. For our grant, the project that we're working on is at MLK Junior Park in Smithville. It's the project cost is a little over $100,000. Our in-kind is $14,500, so $14,500. So it's mostly in-kind is what we were able to put in. So we're so grateful for St. Davis to provide, really, to pay for the whole project, really. And we're getting a new playscape that's ADA appropriate, fitness equipment, sunshade, things like that. It's amazing how much these things cost, and that's but we're getting some really good stuff for the money. Our partners are Smithville Independent School District. The after school program is working with us to activate the parks. We're still in the process of figuring out what that all looks like at this time, but a lot of what they're talking about doing are things like doing geocaching and trying to get activities where no big groups have to gather, but is still interesting for the kids to go and to play in the park and to have some kind of an activity that then we're going to have this big eco photo festival coming up. And so if they can take some pictures of what they're doing and then, have a little bit of a contest and things like that would be a really good thing. And also we just recently received a grant to get some broadband in the park through the Smithville Public Library. That was Union Pacific gave us a grant for that. And I was just looking, I should have thought myself to go sit out in the park. It just didn't even occur to me to go out and take advantage of the Wi-Fi there. I wish I had thought about it, but it's just brand new to us there too as well. So some of the obstacles that we've had so far is that obviously we did have a little bit of a late start into February. We were still kind of getting our kind of things together when we should have been working in January, but sometimes that happens. And then COVID hit. And so, but instead of shifting any of the funding into operations, basically what we did was we just shifted all of our operational staff focused on COVID. So it's really just shifted our time frame. So rather than front loading all of the activities and all of the, getting everything put together for the first half of the year, it just shifted everything into the last half of the year. And so we are going to be done by December 2020, but that's pretty much how COVID has impacted our project. But we're really looking forward to it's some really great equipment going to be going in by the end of this month. We'll have the whole playscape will be put together, and we're going to have all of the activation work put together and all of that stuff. So we're excited to be making it happen. So back to y'all.
Thanks so much, Jill. And I'm excited to also introduce Liz Mundine from the city of Luling, who's going to talk a little bit more about their project in Edgar B. Davis Northside Park.
Thank you, Katie. I'm Elizabeth Mundine with the city of Luling. I'm the Assistant Finance Director and Grant Writer for the city. In 2019, with the help of the Healthy Parks Plan, the city of Luling submitted an application to the Parks with Purpose funding opportunity offered by the St. David's Foundation. The Edgar B. Davis Northside Park project focused on a renovation of an existing basketball court, shade installation over an existing playscape, and an expansion of our quarter-mile walking and jogging trail. Edgar B. Davis Northside Park is a 30-acre park, and it was donated to the Luling community in the 1920s by its namesake, Edgar B. Davis. When the pandemic hit and social distancing became became a necessity for the safety of this community. And the city did, in fact, have to close the sports courts and playscapes throughout the community. But what we noticed throughout the spring and into the summers, that there was a shift in how the community was using our parks to fulfill their needs for a healthy and safe way to leave the confines of their homes, but maintaining the CDC guidelines. So at that point is when we saw the community flock to our walking and jogging trails. Throughout this process, and as the pandemic continued on, St. David's Foundation was gracious enough to offer the grantees the opportunity to convert their funding awards to cover operating costs. Luckily, the city of Luling is financially sound and was in a position where we were able to elect to keep the funds designated for the improvements at Edgar B. Davis Northside Park. So COVID did impact our timeline, and the fact that it had delayed the awarding of an additional grant application that we had submitted with the Texas Parks and Wildlife. So that's been our main holdup to actually getting the start of our improvements there at the park. A little more about the city of Luling. It's a small rural community located south of Austin with a population of about 5,800 people. We have a very limited tax base, and with the ever increasing costs to fund the basic community services of public safety and infrastructure, the parks budget is always held to a minimum. And the parks budget typically only covers the maintenance staff needed for the park's upkeep and basic as needed repairs. There's usually not room for any major projects to improve or build upon what's currently at the parks. Many of our community parks haven't even seen any improvements or additions in the last 20, 30 years, maybe even more. So the funding was desperately needed. But with the development of the Healthy Parks Plan and the tools that were part of that program, the city of Luling now has the opportunity to provide concrete data to support the needs of the community and quantify the health and socioeconomic status of the community. So we're able to add that to our grant applications now to give more support and show the needs and make it more verifiable for those reviewing applications. So the Healthy Parks Plan, along with some local community surveys that we did in-house, allowed the city of Luling to submit a strong application to the St. David's Foundation for their Parks with Purpose program. What we did is we utilized that award from St. David's Foundation as a cash match and then submitted an application to the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department under their Small Communities program. So that nearly doubled the amount of monies we'll be able to put into improvements at Edgar B. Davis Northside Park. And one of the things I always want to stress about what we face as a small community is that without these funding opportunities, such as the St. David's Parks with Purpose program and the development of strong tools like the Healthy Parks Plan available to us, the small communities, we just wouldn't have an opportunity to make these improvements at our parks. It would still rely on the basic community grassroots approaches that our local citizens put together to make any of these improvements or strides forward in our park system happen. So as the community has had to shift their daily routines and a result of the pandemic, we're seeing it's becoming more apparent of how important the community parks are to families and how parks should be more of a focal point of opportunities to provide safe, free, and healthy options for family lifestyle changes and personal well-being. It's becoming abundantly apparent that parks are just going to be even more important to our communities and our daily lives. And so by having these tools available to us and these funding sources, this is the way the small communities can find ways to make improvements at their parks that have needed it for so many years. So at this time, I'd be happy to turn the discussion back over to Brianna to continue the conversation.
Yeah, and I think we'll have a minute for Q&A, and I just wanted to thank both of you for taking the time to do this. And just be clear, I think we were uniquely situated, focusing on a healthy parks plan and then having that go into funding for healthy parks to actually implement these projects, because when the pandemic hit, we were able to really make a case for why, especially in a pandemic, parks are so important. And that's part of what we're going to get into, and I'm going to hand it over to Brianna to get more into a survey that we created and a toolkit that we're working on to really think about how we can even better advocate for parks, especially knowing how important they've been in this pandemic and beyond. Thanks.
Thanks, Katie, Liz, and Jill. I think this all ties together really nicely for the rest of the presentation. Thank you guys for your stories. So our first Q&A break, we're going to spend the next 2 minutes. If you guys can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Our first question is, do you guys have any questions for our grant recipients here today, Jill or Liz? You know, maybe you're curious about a particular aspect of their approach to putting together a proposal for their project, or maybe you have specific questions about, you know, how things are going on the ground in their communities. And then our second question here, which can just be all lumped into the Q&A feature of our chat box. Have you used the Healthy Parks Plan tool before? And if not, and you're interested in learning more, there is going to be a presentation next week by the Austin Parks Foundation Park Summit, where they're going to actually be doing this webinar series to learn about the tools features. So if we're going to just pause here, if anyone has any questions, just let us know and we'll be here to answer them. And Kathleen, while people are typing or considering any questions, do you have anything to add about next week's presentation?
Sure. Yes, we will be hosting a training on the various tools. We have a Healthy Parks Plan page now on the APF website, and right now there is a training video that's there. This one will be more interactive, so that the trainer from Trust for Public Land will be walking through kind of the most used features of the plan, of the tool rather, and then allowing people to kind of do it on their own computer, because it is open source. It's something that's available to everyone, but making sure everyone knows how to make an account, how to use the features. It really is a wonderful tool, especially if you're writing grants. You want to make a case for the needs in the area of your neighborhood around your park. We use it all the time. I do have one question.
Great.
Okay, so this is from Charlotte. It says, I would like to know if you're going to address the COVID-19 related overload of dog play issues in Austin. This is especially for Garrison Park in Austin. We've had such a huge population growth, and everyone I know suddenly also got a dog too. This is directly tied to work personal confinement. Post-COVID, these dogs will remain. Walkers, runners, child strollers, and leash dogs are being harassed and sometimes attacked by unleashed dogs in Garrison Park. Unleash Our Dog advocates has passed the word, and now there might be as many as 20 plus unleashed dogs running throughout the park at any given visit. Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I'm misreading the question. So basically advocates of sort of people who are unofficial advocates, I'd say, have passed the word on, and now there's lots of dogs running unleashed. I don't know if anyone on the call has anything to say about that. I have a little bit that I could say about that.
You know, I know that that's a specific problem, but it's even manifesting in my little neighborhood park, and PARD has put up signage. I think it's one of those things where, you know we can utilize 411. PARD is responsible for not monitoring actually, but they're responsible for ensuring that rules are being followed in parks. But I think as it pertains to this Healthy Parks work and the Parks with Purpose work, I mean, I think it's just a testament also to how important parks have been as a part of coping strategies for being confined and even feeling connected even when we're distanced to community. In terms of, I'm happy to provide contact information for PARD folks if those are folks you want to get involved with, but I think the folks on this call do not have the purview to be able to speak specifically to Garrison Park issues.
Yeah, I would just say, just to kind of chime in, since I work with park adopters all over the city, it's not just an issue at Garrison Park, and there's people sort of on all sides of the issue. And so it absolutely is something that everyone is kind of navigating. And actually, Kimberly McNeely, who is the Austin Parks Department director, has raised her hand. So I'm going to let her speak to it because she has a lot more authority on this issue. So Kimberly, I'm going to allow you to talk. All right, Kimberly.
I had just put in the chat because I'm not as much as I wish I was technologically advanced, I'm not so much. And so I didn't realize that anyway, I couldn't figure out how to unmute myself, but obviously that's not within my control. So thank you. Anyway, I put in the chat my phone number, my direct phone number. And if you're having a particular issue at a particular park, if you want to call me and help me know a little more detail, we can do some what we call directed patrols and send folks over at the times when we believe that when you have told us that the rule infractions are occurring, because it's much more efficient for us to have lots of information about when it's occurring and time frames, so that we're not sending people over at a time and we don't see anything, and then there's just a frustration all along. So I left my phone number in the chat, and anyone who's having a specific issue at a specific park, please feel free to contact me directly, and we will definitely talk through it and then figure out how we can address the issue.
Thank you, Kimberly, so much. And I appreciate everyone chiming in the chat feature. We also have some questions for Jill, and she already answered, and she provided her email address about the Wi-Fi. I'm gonna get us moving through the next part of our presentation, but please keep the comments coming. We can always be answering questions live through the text feature as well.
Absolutely.
We're going to be now talking about the survey that we sent out in advance of this webinar. And thank you if any of our participants today filled it out. We previously sent a survey out to all of the St. David's Foundation grant recipients, as well as 150 of our contacts from the Healthy Parks plan that we previously done. And we were really interested in exploring the response to park use before and after COVID. And of course, this survey was sent in the height of summer, so there might have been some impacts surrounding heat. But we also had a variety of contacts that we intentionally reached out to kind of get a perspective between more of the rural, smaller communities such as Liz and Luling to more of the urban and suburban communities. So we really wanted to kind of get an understanding of social distancing norms during COVID as well. So I'm going to just quickly highlight some of the things that I found interesting. And then I'm going to ask you guys a couple questions. So, you know, most of our respondents were from the public sector. So today I know that we have a majority nonprofit sector participation. And we did get responses from Luling and Caldwell County, and of course, Austin. We had Elgin represented. I personally felt it was a really great representation. And over 90% of the respondents did say that their parks were closed or restrictions were in place during the pandemic. But what I found was interesting was that there were mixed results to the question of how have you perceived park use? You can see here that it was actually pretty evenly split between people expressing more activity versus less activity. And I think some of the nuance that was really interesting was a lot of people said there's definitely been less activity around playgrounds and gatherings for obvious reasons, but significantly more use in trails, walking, biking, and jogging. One so much respondents said 300%, you know, it's just so much, which some people have felt stress or concern for their health or concern for their community's health because of how much use their trails have been receiving. I also liked one example that pocket parks had decrease in use, but larger parks had increase in use. So I think, you know, those nuanced responses were really fascinating. And I'll just quickly say we're going to be summarizing these results and publishing so that they'll be publicly available so that you all can use them in your communities. You know, say if you're, you know, pursuing other funding after COVID. So my next slide. This is more about, you know, the perception of and the benefits of parks. And, you know, everyone, of course, on this call understands the benefits of parks. The average score of, you know, we asked a question, can you scale 1 to 10 about how important parks have been during the past 5 months? And the average score was 7. So people definitely have utilized parks during this time. A lot of people expressed that they valued parks during this time because it was a break from being in the house or identifying the need to relax and release stress and occupy family members. So this all ties in nicely to what we're going to be covering later in terms of our park advocacy toolkit. And my last slide about the survey got more into the nuts and bolts about projects, parks projects, and how is it going, you know, in a time of where attention is being put elsewhere in terms of public health and, you know, the state of our economy. And everyone agreed, you know, projects are on hold, and it is a little concerning to see the direction of funding. A lot of people express concern about future funding, especially as sales tax are decreased in the Central Texas and nationwide. Nonprofit funding is going elsewhere, you know, so as Liz mentioned, that gap financing for her small municipality is really important, and without it, projects wouldn't be able to move forward. So we hope that that can add to our conversation and leverage our concern to keep advocating for park funding and noting here about how important park use is during pandemics and afterwards. So just, you know, another opportunity for Q&A. We'd love to know, did any of this surprise you? Do you have anything that you'd like to add that wasn't captured in our survey findings? And so the chat feature is now open again for you guys to chime in, and Kathleen is going to be moderating the Q&As as they come in. And after this Q&A opportunity, we're going to be moving into our park advocacy toolkit. So we'll be moving into the second half of our presentation. And if there are no follow-up questions, that's totally fine. We can just move on.
Yeah, I would just say, just to give a little bit of time for people to chime in if they want to. We definitely in Austin, you know, have noticed, I'm sure lots of people who've been to the parks in Austin have noticed like a sharp spike in the use at certain parks, and how that's had to be managed, and the messaging that we've tried to work with the city to help get out that, you know, try using parks in your own neighborhoods and trying to kind of spread out the crowds a little bit. So it's been interesting to see that change. Let's see. Elizabeth Marzek from City of Elgin said, I'm surprised that the usage was split between less and more usage. For us, all of our parks saw significant increases in use. This may be in part because there's no other entertainment options in a small town and no school or work to interfere.
Yeah, I agree. There was, in terms of the differences between smaller towns, suburban towns, and urban, it actually was all over the place. I mean, some people even said so much that in their, you know, Austin neighborhood, they've seen a reduction in use, but then in places like Elgin, there was increases. So I do think it also depended on the messaging from city officials about how serious COVID was, or how strict they were going to monitor park closures, you know, if they fence things off, if they rope things off. Julia Cleary said, not sure if this is relevant, but I noticed a lot of tip the trail signs from the Austin Parks Foundation.
I think those were actually from Trail Foundation.
Yeah, that's the Trail Foundation.
Yeah, I'm on the board of Trail Foundation, so can sort of sometimes speak a little bit to that stuff, but that's totally fine. You know, I think just those tip the trail signs were certainly in recognition of, you know, a lot of the nonprofits that are doing parks work are worried about funding and continuing to be able to fund their operations and the good work that they're doing to fill gaps to really have exceptional park spaces in the region. And also just recognition that more and more people are using these trails, and that also has a direct impact on maintenance and on making sure that these places stay amazing. So I think that was, there's been a lot of focus on how important the Roy Ann Butler hike and bike trail has been for folks in COVID, and also you know, a lot of attempts to make sure that we're managing it for the safety of people and the ecosystem that it's in.
Thanks, Katie.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, what we're excited to present today is our draft of the Park Advocacy Toolkit. This toolkit is designed to provide 5 evidence-based tools as to why park investment is important for everyone's community, and framed in such a way to advocate for future park funding. So I think up until this point in the webinar, we've done a really good job at expressing park funding is tight and why it is needed in certain strategic locations. So many of us on this call know these tools. They probably could recite some of these figures by heart, but strategically using them to apply for grants, or say to persuade a department director, or to create a community campaign. If you're a community member and you want to advocate for your pocket park or your neighborhood park, that's the hard part. So the audience of this toolkit is intended to be a wide audience, from local citizens to city council staff members. It is going to be publicly available this fall. So we're taking all the feedback from today's webinar, and we're going to be incorporating it into a final draft. St. David's Foundation will be the official host of the toolkit, and but it will be available on websites, and I'm sure Austin Parks Foundation will post it to theirs as well. And we'll be sending it out to all of the grant recipients. So we'd love feedback. So please, let all the comments come. We would really appreciate it. So I'm going to just quickly go into the format of our tools. So each one has peer-reviewed research, and that's going to be really dense. Then we have key talking points. This is more of a great place to start if you're looking for simplified conclusions to that tool, and it's not going to be as dense. The third is funding and action. We've provided examples of projects in Central Texas that are supported by state level funding. And then lastly, the fourth thing that each tool will have is equity metrics. And we thought that this was really a great opportunity to tie it back to the Healthy Parks Plan tool. Again, training is next week if you want to chime in. These are going to be metrics that your proposal or project can benchmark to leverage in your pursuit for funding or support. So the first one is how parks support physical health. So again, I know everyone on this call can definitely see this in their personal lives and their daily work. But what we like to mention here is that Parks and Open Space provides free and reliable space for residents to maintain their physical health. The COVID pandemic has highlighted this critical point. As you guys know, recreation centers and gyms are all vulnerable to closures and are preventative for low-income residents. So we all know that living near parks increase the likelihood of exercising, and park features and programming significantly increases the physical benefits to visitors. So this toolkit does detail in some length the physical benefits associated with the various programming amenities. So say, playgrounds versus swimming pools versus fitness equipment. So the equity metrics that we really think are important, we suggest using this physical health tool after your community has identified a park need in a park desert, especially if this particular neighborhood is home to residents that lack access to healthcare, are low income, or are majority people of color. We also suggest using it, and noting that people of color typically have higher rates of socioeconomic and health disparities. So creating a baseline for reported chronic illness rates within this particular community will be key, and that's kind of where the Healthy Park Plan Toolkit tool would be useful here. And then documenting how many children and adults report increased physical activity over a period of time. So our next tool is that the parks boost the local economy. So parks and open space can be a catalyst for economic growth and development. We view this as attracting businesses, providing jobs, and drawing visitors to surrounding businesses. So expanding the tax base is great. But we want to definitely note here that we feel that as long as a project can sustain the community it was meant to serve through anti-displacement strategies, I'll get at that in a second. you guys might have heard, might be hearing the term green gentrification. That's kind of what I'm getting at here. Parks, they generate jobs, especially green jobs. So that would be something you might want to leverage if you're pursuing a particular council person that's really excited about sustainability. Jobs are related to concessions or rentals. And another catchy term that you can use is ecotourism, if that fits within the priorities of your community. The design and amenities associated with the park significantly increase the economic return of the park. For example, green trees and green spaces have been traced with increased sales of nearby stores, and that's just from the proximity and visual stimulant it provides. Amenities will increase park visitors who are more likely to stop and buy a nearby store for a treat or to browse. So the equity metrics that I'd like to mention here, we think that this tool would be useful if your community has identified a park need adjacent to existing businesses, schools, or shopping centers, especially if this business community has been historically marginalized of public investment, again, as long as anti-displacement plans are in place for the community. Creating baselines for the number of businesses, the real estate value, the number of jobs and sales can be documented over time. And I also think this is good to note that these numbers could help transparency between you and the surrounding businesses in case displacement or property values do cause displacement. So the next three tools, Ucha, Abba is actually going to chime in and cover starting here. Ucha, I think you are getting set up. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, so parks help establish community relationships and nurture mental health. And so this can be really important, especially now at a time where, as we've talked about, people are experiencing isolation, wanting to get out and get into park spaces. Here, 3 in 5 US residents report feeling lonely, and 24% of Americans express having poor mental health. And so, yeah, parks mitigate isolation by serving as spaces for residents to gather, and parks programming further builds social cohesion by offering opportunities for residents to mingle with neighbors. And so here you want to think about diagnoses and symptoms of depression and anxiety or stress, and the amount of open space and water and access to water features, access to open spaces, and programming that supports community relationships. Would you mind going to the next slide? Thank you. So parks support active living for all ages and abilities. So children, elderly populations, and people who have disabilities are at an increased risk of developing chronic illness, as well as experiencing social isolation. For children, it's important for them to develop strength and flexibility, and for elderly populations, it's important for them to maintain that strength and flexibility, as well as to prevent muscular degeneration. For both of these populations, it's very important for them to also socialize, and that park spaces are a great opportunity through programming and play, a great opportunity for these populations to do that. Populations who live with disabilities are actually at a higher risk for developing secondary conditions like diabetes and high blood pressure. And so that's really important when thinking about not just having a facility, but can all people who are adults and children access and maneuver the facility as well as adjacent infrastructure, so bathrooms, fountains, things of that nature. Some things to consider when approaching access are who's within a 15-minute walk of a park, the parks per capita, so thinking through in the area in your community, which parks are serving, or how many parks per 1,000 people, how many acres per 1,000 people are being served, and if there's sort of a disparity there. And then the percent of parks that have multimodal access, so especially with older populations or populations experiencing or populations living with disabilities, it's important to think through your park space, not just having driving access, but walking access or bike or public transportation. And then it's important here also to think through whether the sidewalks and park materials are ADA compliant, as well as multi-generational programming. So for ages and abilities, there's a wide variety of scale when it comes to sort of investment and metrics. You can go to the next slide, Brianna. Okay, thank you. And so for this one, parks improve local environmental conditions. And so air pollution and extreme weather like heat and flooding impact human health and the ability to use park spaces. And so air pollution can aggravate respiratory conditions such as asthma and result in mortality events. Extreme heat can cause heat-related illnesses as well as result in mortality events. And flooding can result in mortality events, but it can also render parks unusable as well as damage infrastructure that's not designed for inundation. And so some things to think about are that a 25% increase in tree canopy can reduce local afternoon temperatures by 6 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. It can also reduce the energy usage of buildings adjacent to this increase in tree canopy, as well as it can improve air quality. So thinking about people who already have chronic lung conditions, as well as the development of those conditions. So being able to have, tree canopy to address air quality issues is really important, as well as green infrastructure that can address issues of heat and air quality, as well as managing floods. So some things to consider here, or some metrics, would be increasing tree canopy cover, and especially thinking through communities or neighborhoods where that use would be exponentially helpful. Increasing shade structures, so trees can serve as shade structures, but also you can build or get funding to build shade structures that aren't necessarily trees and that have more of an artistic spin on it. And then as well as strategic remediation through soil and water, as well as green infrastructure improvements.
Thanks, Uta. Sorry, I'm unmuting myself. So I know that we just did a big old brain dump on you guys, but we are super excited about this tool and how it can be partnered and assist everyone on the call as they, again, anyone at any level of the park, park advocacy or park department can use this. So we just have 2 questions for an interactive 2 minutes. How have you used similar evidence-based reasons to advocate for a park project or park funding? And are we missing anything? So we did, attempt to simplify this into 5 tools. It was a little hard to choose. But again, just from the point of view that this can be used to help you or your community members to advocate for more park funding in your community. So I'll pause now if anyone has any questions or answers. And I'll quickly say that we did get some suggestions in the chat box about where to post this. So we do appreciate that, Charlotte. I think that's a great idea. And then people have also been posting some upcoming invites for some outdoor roundtables. So please check those out in the chat feature if you guys want to participate.
Julia mentioned potential for the question number 2, potential revenue generation options for parks.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. Right now our economic section kind of relies more about the surrounding properties, but I think that's a really good point about how parks can generate revenue within themselves that can then go back into the park budget. So that's a great point. Thank you.
Yeah, and just one comment on that too for Julia. I think, I certainly cannot speak for Parks and Rec, and I know Kimberly's on here, but part of the way PARD runs things is that they don't make money on using park assets because they're meant to be a public resource. And so any fee that you might pay to use parks is directly related to what it costs them to maintain it and their operations for it. And they're pretty strict about that, and that makes sense. But on the flip side, there are a lot of nonprofits that there might be more flexibility to be able to do some revenue generating events within parks, and other cities that might run things differently. But that's certainly something that we can think about. And at least speaking, for instance, from the Trail Foundation perspective, there's opportunity to really think about more parks programming along the trail that can help support a heightened level of service, for stewardship of our parks and trails assets in the region.
Thanks, Katie. We're going to move into our creative ideas. So Michelle, if you don't mind turning on your video and unmuting yourself. And this is the last section of our presentation, and then we'll be closing at the end. So if you guys have any concluding questions, feel free to go ahead and start putting those in the Q&A feature.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'll be closing us out for today on kind of a fun last topic. And so personally, as a parks advocate myself and working in the realm of parks planning and design, we've been all thinking about what are important creative ideas to safely do within our parks and open spaces. And then on a more personal level, I've been sharing the pandemic time with my toddler. So I've been trying to think of these ideas almost every day. So we're excited to bring you some, and we did a quick scan both with what is happening in Central Texas and then throughout the country. So there has been park spaces that are opening very safely with certain programming, and some have done ideas like drive-through movies or smaller performances, outdoor art, or even spaces for meetings, which is kind of a cool idea for your next big meeting. This one picture on the right, or on the right, shows Rochester Art Center. They hosted an ice cream social with a band, so that was a cool idea. Brianna, you can go to the next slide. So here's a few other examples, just of some images that people have been doing. On the left, some smaller performance ideas. In the middle top is kind of that office space idea with desks that are farther apart. I know there's probably logistical challenges there with technology, but this could be a really fun way to host a meeting. On the top right side, you see these little, it's a little hard to see, but you see these little squares in a big open lawn. And that's at Republic Square. And this is an installation by Park Space put on by Austin AIA. And what it does is it shows these blocks or these squares being about 6 feet apart. So this is a cool and kind of really inexpensive way to show people how to use open space and picnic, but be socially distanced. The last 3 photos on the bottom of this slide show a few larger events and some ideas to kind of create space for people. If it's hosted in your car, not all parks have that ability to drive up to, but if you do, that's an idea as well. You can go to the next slide, Brianna. So this slide itself just kind of speaks to the importance of space in general for people to not only socially connect, to exercise, to run, to even just have a walk with a friend. But I also think it's important to say, and I've seen an uptick, I'm in also the Garrison Park neighborhood. And so there is definitely an uptick of people using spaces to walk around and find exercise. And then to talk to the Trails Foundation, where they have a concentrated amount of people using a trail, they've put in policies to go in one direction, like counterclockwise, so it's reducing your interactions with people. So there are ways, if you're a really, really popular park, to start implementing some strategies. You can go to the next slide, please. So this one's kind of near and dear to me. Park discovery, there's ways of kind of bringing people into your park in smaller groups. So as I mentioned, Garrison is my park, and with my 2-year-old, when we first started the pandemic, she would cry because she couldn't get on the play structure. Every time we biked by, she'd be screaming. So we had to shift to doing building with nature materials, with sticks, with rocks, with bark, with seeds, with berries, everything we could find. And now when we go outside, that's what she wants to do. So it's kind of a cool like kind of shift in her mind to what is fun to do outside. We've also used some green infrastructure, well, not green infrastructure, but infrastructure for stormwater to do stuff like chalk designs on. Of course, doing that in a safe way where there's not a lot of water is important. So this lists a few other cool activities from environmental education, geocaching, which was brought up already, scavenger hunts, photo voice projects, nature bingo. And then I also want to point out the last one. If you have a park space that is under renovation or in construction, you can also do a digital tour at Waterloo Greenway. That's something they had been implementing during this pandemic to get people excited about what's coming next. And I think that was a really cool way to do so. You can go to the next slide, Brianna. You can also consider how you could extend your park. In Austin, they put in this program it's a Healthy Streets program where they close down lower use roadways to allow for people to bike and jog and stroll their children. And this is a really cool way to think of just expanding our space into the public realm and use safely. I've used a few trails that are south this way or a few roadways that are with the Healthy Streets program. And it's really, I feel so much better taking a toddler out and doing it that way. So I appreciate this program right now, but there's different ways of implementing it, maybe near your park. If there's park space or parking spaces you can use, those are some ideas. You can go to the next slide. So these are just a few images of people enjoying the right-of-way, the public space in a different way through closures, and it brings out a lot of families in these areas. You can go to the next slide, Brianna. So yeah, we really wanted to just take this minute to ask you a few questions about how your community or department, if you've successfully implemented any creative ideas. Are you planning any now for the fall? Because now it's getting, at least in Central Texas, a little bit cooler. And do you have any other kind of creative things you wanted to discuss? I think it's a chance for us to kind of learn from each other about these opportunities.
All right. While people are formulating questions, I have two upcoming events that I can tell everyone about that are related to this. The Roots and Wings Festival, which is normally at Zilker Botanical Garden and is a citywide, lots of city partners and community partners. And it's a celebration of Arbor Day, Texas Arbor Day, and Monarch Appreciation Day. We're doing it virtually this year, but we're really trying to emphasize that it's virtual only in that the sort of landing place for it is online, but everything is really meant to get people outdoors, exploring parks and green spaces safely. And then also it's my park day this year, which is normally 100 projects across the city with big volunteer groups. We won't be having the volunteer component this year, but we will be making it more of a virtual event and kind of helping people understand that there's other ways to be engaged and steward your park without necessarily having to mulch trees or pick up trash, although picking up trash and mulching trees are very important, but that kind of broadening people's sort of ideas about ways to engage in their parks. Let's see. We have, from Elizabeth Marzek, we did free activity books weekly all summer and gave out about 2,000 over 3 months. That's wonderful. We included exercises, scavenger hunts, crafts, etc. One of the most popular things was when we gave out chalk and jump ropes with these books. Now we're doing story walk and putting chalk out with them in the park so that families can read the book, walk, and then express their creativity without having to bring any supplies to the park. That's awesome. That's such a great idea. There really, I think, are a lot of opportunities for creativity right now, and I think we're seeing that. Everybody's really having to kind of go, okay, we have to really rethink everything that we've done if you do a lot of in-person work, which we do. And so while that's challenging, it's also been a way for us to really expand what we offer, and it seems like other cities and other groups are doing the same thing.
Thanks, Kathleen. I'll wrap us up here. Thank you guys, everyone, the attendees, the panelists, our hosts from Austin Parks Foundation. Thank you guys so much for being with us today. And I've put up the last slide, just has our contact information. Please get in touch with us. We'd love to hear what you guys think. We're going to be publishing the toolkit online, so keep an eye out for that. I can make sure to email everyone that joined us today on the webinar and let you guys know when that's ready to go. So again, thanks so much, and I'll just leave that there.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining.
Bye, everyone.
All right, bye-bye.